Steve Dotto here. How the heck you doing this fine day? I want to share with you today 5 pieces of hardware that I remember fondly. I don't know why. Been doing a walk down memory lane. I've been thinking about the software that I used that kind of crafted me into the technologist that I am today, and the hardware pieces that I used. I don't know what caused me to kind of go down this rabbit hole, but as I plunged down it, I had these waves of nostalgia looking at these different pieces of hardware. I'm wondering if you experience the same thing. What hardware pieces do you still fondly remember? What pieces of technology did you invest in that you really embraced, that really made a difference? Now, not every one of these pieces did I completely embrace, but they all made a huge difference to me as I evolved my comprehension of how technology was going to work for me. So where to begin? Where to begin? You know, do you remember this one? This was the first real piece of communications technology that I owned myself. Now, before this, I had a different one. I can't even remember the model of the very first modem I had, but the first modem that I had that I used a lot to connect to the outside world from my home computer was a US Robotics Sportster modem. Do you remember them? Now, back in the day, I'm going to sound so old today, but back in the day, I used the Sportster modem to connect to BBSs. Do you remember the old BBSs? They were bulletin board services, and you would sign on with a piece of communication software, and they were hosted by fans, by individuals who would pay extra money to the telcos to put in POTS lines, plain old telephone service lines into their house. They'd have a bank of modems hooked up to a computer that was running a piece of server software that was their BBS, and you could share documents. You could use it for sending messages back and forth. People could share images, although they were low resolution images for the most part. But you could have chat boards. You could have conversations happening, and typically speaking, there was 2, 3, 4, sometimes one line in. So you would call these numbers, beep, 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 gawk, 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 and you'd go to connect, and half the time you get a busy signal, and they usually limited the amount of time you could be online. They were sometimes donations would support them, but for the most part, these were done out of the goodness of the individual's heart. And these BBSs eventually, of course, fell by the wayside when we got the internet and when we started having web browsers and full access to the internet. But they were enabled quite fondly, as far as I remember, by modems like the US Robotics Sportster, which I used. If you really had money, you bought the career modem, but I bought the Sportster modem. Now, another piece of technology that I really remember fondly was this. This is the iOmega zip drive. Do you remember it? There was a variety of different types of removable storage back in the day. Of course, we had our own floppy drives in a computer, but then for larger storage, they had a variety of different removable drive types where the drive itself was a cartridge and you could put it in and take it out and you could store multiple drives. Now, the zip drive was really an interesting tool. It was kind of the next generation behind something called the Bernoulli box, which were, I think the original Bernoulli boxes were under 10 megabytes per disk. But here we had a storage device that was the size of a floppy disk that could store up to 100 megabytes of information, which seemed so enormous back in the day. Of course, today, that's, you have photos that are larger than that for the most part. But that was the storage technology. And one of my fondest memories of the iOmega zip drive was back when we were doing the TV show. iOmega sponsored us one season, and they wanted us to tell the story of the zip drive. And I can still remember we wrote a little piece going to commercial. And I said, after the break, zippity-doo-dah, zippity-day, something to show you. And I sang it like that. And I guess I got to be careful about singing it even now. But when that show went to air, guess who we got a letter from? Disney. Their content and copyright people wrote us, sent us a cease and desist letter, and we had to pull the episode from syndication. We had to pull that episode out of and tell all the networks to stop airing it, or we were going to be sued by Disney. Holy jumping! That happened. That was with the zip drive. Oh my gosh, I remember that well. What else have I got here to share with you? And two PDAs, two personal digital assistants that were pre-phone. The one I used for years and just loved was the Palm Pilot. Did you have a Palm Pilot? Tell me in the comments if you had a Palm Pilot, what you used it for. It was an address book, contact manager. It looked like a phone, but it wasn't a phone. It was just a personal digital assistant. You kept your calendar, you kept your to-do list, and you kept your address book on it, and it was a piece of work. So well developed, such an incredible leap forward when we first saw it. I mean, by today's standard, it's so pedestrian what it does and what it did, but by our estimation in the day, it was a game changer. And every season that we did the TV show, we always made sure we did a couple of stories on the Palm Pilot, showing people how to use it. And I just love the Palm Pilot. It's still maybe my favorite piece of tech, personal tech, that I ever had. Now, Apple tried to one-up them, and they released something called the Newton. And the Newton was a colossal failure, but it was Apple's effort to get into the PDA marketplace. And it was a typical case of Apple arrogance, priced 3 or 4 times what the Palm Pilot was. It would do more theoretically, but certainly had less buy-in from the community in the marketplace, and it crashed and burned. But it was an exciting and interesting piece of personal technology that is, of course, Apple's since developed some great personal technologies that have, a lot of it's grown out of the entire Newton division. But the Newton itself was a terrible, terrible, terrible piece of hardware. I'm sure some of you will write and say, it wasn't that bad, Steve. No, maybe it wasn't bad tech, but Apple's arrogance showed at the day when they released the Newton, and it never became the world changer that it could be. But I still fondly remember it. And the final piece is, and I don't know why I still remember this one so fondly. Maybe because the very first big sale I ever made as a computer salesman was I sold a desktop publishing system to a large magazine. And we were using Macintosh SE computers. And I love the Mac SE. It was the next generation after the Mac Plus, with a slightly redesigned case with these nice vents in the front, and Apple's trademark black and white screen, just the black and white monochrome screen, so easy on the eyes. But it was a tiny little screen, 9-inch screen, and you couldn't get a lot of copy. And if you're doing full page layout work where you're actually formatting text and laying out pages as you wanted to for a magazine, you couldn't do an 8.5 by 11 page on this 9-inch screen. So Radius, a company, released something called the full page display, and we had to install the video card into the Mac, and it was like really difficult to, a lot of engineering went into making it fit. But you could put a full page display that would give you an 8.5 by 11 display, rotated to be a full page display, beside the Macintosh SE, giving you the dual screen capability, which was phenomenal for the day. But graphic designers could lay out full pages of text for magazines, for newspapers, for newsletters. You could lay out a full page and see where your graphics were going to be, see how your type was going to lay, see where your page breaks were going to be. You could see that all accurately on the Radius FPD full page display. And just to give you a sense of, I'm just kind of remembering now, but I think I'm pretty accurate with this. Back when I sold that installation of Macintosh SE computers, they had 1 megabyte of RAM, they had a 20 megabyte hard drive. Each one of those computers cost $5,000. The Radius full page display for each computer was $3,000. So it was $8,000 for a Macintosh computer and a full page display before we put any of the software on it. Before we put any software on, it was $8,000. And back in those days, for those of you who are commission salesmen, I think our commission on sales was something like 30%. We made good money when we sold those computers. And maybe that's why I remember that so fondly. It was a big payday every time we sold them. But those are kind of some of the technology that I remember. All of this would have been pre-1999. Back in the computers that I sold would have been about 1992 is when I would have been selling those computers. But that gives you an idea of kind of some of the technology that formed me. I don't know if you found this interesting. I hope you did. I'd love to hear your memories of your favorite pieces of hardware that you grew up with in your formative years in technology. Till next time, I'm Steve Dotto. Have fun storming a castle.